In this tutorial, I'll show you how to craft realistic crepe paper succulents that look beautiful on their own or layered into arrangements and wreaths. We'll work with color and blending and shaping techniques that give your plants the fresh from nature look without ever needing to water them. The supplies you're going to need for this project is 90-gram crepe paper. You'll want to have scissors to cut out these templates, or you can use a cutting machine if you have one that works with a rotary blade. You'll want to have a hot glue gun, and you'll also want to have some liquid craft glue. You'll want a dowel rod or a scraper edge tool to be able to shape your petals. You'll need some 18-gauge floral wire if you wish to stem, and floral tape. This is optional, but I highly recommend using something like distress inks or oxides with a blending brush so you can get color and shading onto your flowers. You'll also want some needle nose pliers and wire cutters, and sewing clips can be super helpful when you're cutting by hand with scissors. All three of these succulent templates are part of the Cali Botanical Collection, which also includes beautiful pairings like our paper poppies, prickly pear cactus, and agave plant. Find the templates for this project and all of my supplies linked below this video in the description. All right, my friends, so like I said, we're going to be making these crepe paper succulents. I'm going to be showing you all three of these. Now, they are made almost exactly the same way. The only difference is the shape of the petal and how many petals you might use per flower here, because we have this one that's a skinnier petal versus a wider petal. So we will go over the petal count in just a minute, but just know that these are all made in a very similar fashion. I'm going to be showing you one of each here, and included in the templates there is also a larger variation. So if you want that more classic succulent small style like this, which I'm showing you today, you're going to get this result here. But if you go with the bigger ones, perhaps you want to make a larger wreath or a larger arrangement or something like that, and you really want some bigger flowers, then use those larger template options. Again, made exactly the same way, they've just been enlarged so that you'll get a bigger result. So of course, first you'll need to get your petals cut out, and I'm just going to show you how I would do this with just an example here. So here is a template that I am using. You can of course use your cutting machine if you have one that supports a rotary blade and can cut crepe paper, but I'm just going to show you a basic example here. So here's one of the templates. It is the blue one here. And what I like to do is I'll take my crepe paper, I'll fold it over once so that I can cut 2 petals at a time. I have my template already cut out here from my PDF, or you can use a cutting machine if you have one that's compatible with it, excuse me. And I'm going to place my template here on the crepe paper with the grain running vertically. So grain is going this way, not this way. Okay, I got long grain going here. That way we can cup and stretch our petals. I'm using a little sewing clip here to hold this in place. You can use a paper clip, a binder clip. You can even just be careful and hold your fingers, but I find having that really helps. I'm going to grab a pair of scissors. You can use a pair of detail scissors. Either these here are really fine detail scissors. They do make ones that are slightly larger, but I like these because they're super sharp. So I'm going to trim off some of that extra crepe paper there. And I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to start trimming. Again, that grain is running vertical, and we have notes of that in the template for you to help. And by folding it over like this, we're cutting 2 at a time, which helps speed up the process a lot. I do not recommend generally cutting more than 2 at a time because it's going to get hard to go through that crepe paper accurately. You're going to end up with a lot more fray on your edges. And max 3 at a time is what I would recommend. But I prefer 2. I feel like it's easier. You can cut through the paper faster as well, so it actually speeds up the process in that aspect. All right, so put my scraps aside over here. Get rid of that clip, and there we go. We have now successfully cut 2 of our succulent template. All right, so as far as petal count goes, the purple in my case here, and they're going to be similar colors in the template, so you'll know which ones I'm referring to. For the purple, you're going to want between 32 and 37, depending on your overlap. You could use less. For the green, you're going to want between 35 and 40. And for the blue, you'll want between 28 and 32. Now, the reason I'm giving a range is because depending on how sharp your angle is, how much overlap you have, if you end up with awkward spacing, you may want to have a few extra petals on hand. So that is your minimum range that you want to look for. So always start with those minimums and just know that you may need a couple petals beyond that, depending on how your particular flower comes together. And my flowers will often come together with different petal amounts as well by 2 or 3. So just know that that does happen. Now, as far as prepping your petals goes, no matter which style of petal you are using, you are going to prep them exactly the same way. It's very simple. You're going to take your petal, and you'll notice here that with each of the petals, there is basically, it's a double petal, so it's mirrored, and there's a bit of a divot in the middle. What you're going to do is you're going to twist it 2 times around. So I'm going to twist once, and then twice, right in that center spot right there. And you're going to create this sort of, I guess you could say, bow tie look with a little twist at the top. Then you're going to grab your glue, and you're going to add glue right at the very bottom there. And you're going to fold it down and just glue the 2 bottom tips together. And then take a minute to get this kind of seated. Press that tip together a bit, and it'll kind of lay down and relax. So you're looking for something like that. It'll already naturally start to have a bit of curl to it before you even stretch the paper. So one more time, and again, all petals made exactly the same way. Once, twice, go gentle with it because you don't want to rip it. But if there is mild stretching or ripping there, that's not going to hurt anything. Just don't rip it all the way through. Glue at the bottom, and then over, just like that. And the reason I designed the petals this way is because it makes it real easy to see where to twist. It creates a nice point, and it has that sort of crinkled, over thick petal, sort of bent over look that those succulents get like this. So that was the idea behind designing the templates this way. Now the next step at this point is to add some distress inks, distress oxides, pan pastels. You can even work with watercolors, paint markers, things like that. So I'm going to be featuring a distress oxide in this case. That is my preferred method, although pan pastels are also great and very popular to use as well. One of the reasons I don't prefer using pan pastels though is because they are a lot more messy. So I'm going to take my distress oxide here, and I'm just going to swirl it on the pad. This is an ink blending brush here. And I'm going to come from the bottom and work my way up with some color here. And I'm going to have it blend so that it fades nicely right into that light blue paper that we started with. It creates that nice ombre fade effect. Okay, so that's what we're looking for there. And then you would repeat this with any of the petals. So notice here with my purples, I would choose a maybe like darker, deeper purple or a dusty purple, or even like a warm gray could even work for something like this if you're thinking about how a succulent looks in nature. But for mine, I decided to use an oxide. This is the Dusty Concord color, and it works pretty well for the purple. And then for my green, I ended up doing a mustard yellow. So like in the case of my green petal here, I used mustard seed for my oxide color, and I just came in here. And because the paper's so dark already, it's not super obvious, but it's obvious enough that when you look at the whole flower, you can really see those colors and those tones playing around in it. So I really like that effect. So to shape our petals at this point, I'm just going to show you one of each. They're all very similar. Looking at this purple one here, you're going to stretch slightly in the middle, the upper half middle area. So I'm using my thumbs to very gently stretch the paper and cup the petal. Don't stretch the edges. Always aim to understretch rather than overstretch. And as I'm stretching, I also like to kind of bend the tip forward just a bit to encourage that cup that much more. And you're looking for something that looks like that. Okay? And then same thing for these other ones. So for like the blue one here, I will cup that here in the middle. And then for this blue flower, you can see here I did a little variation on each. So I want to show you that. If you leave it more where it's just a simple cup like this, you're going to get this look here. Okay? If you want more pointed, which I liked because I wanted variation in my succulents, then once you cup your petal, you're going to want to actually pinch the tip like this. And I sort of put my finger in the cupped area that I've already stretched lightly, and I'll pinch the tip like this. So you're shaping it out and you're creating more of an exaggerated point with the look of your petal. And if you really want it to stay super pointy, you could even put a dot of hot glue or liquid glue in there and do that and get an even more exaggerated look if that's what you want. I haven't done that, but I just wanted to make a note of that in case you'd like to try that for yourself. And then lastly, we have the green petals here. Now these are your skinniest ones. So you are gonna cup the same way, but just bear in mind that because it's so skinny, you're gonna wanna be very slow and careful about how you're cupping because it's very easy to just kind of stretch the whole thing and make it kind of floppy and awkward. So really go slow in the middle there. I kind of, instead of my thumbs being right next to each other, I kind of put them sort of on top of each other because the petal's so long, and I'll sort of stretch that way. Just very lightly, not very much, just like that. And then what I like to do for this one is I like to kind of just pull it forward to create a bit more of a curl to it, like that. Okay, so that's how you would shape all those petals, and go ahead and repeat that for all the petals you need to make one flower. Okay, so I'm gonna start with my purple here first. I also wanna note, in case you're wondering and you're looking at this flower here, the petals, they're not the same as this green one here. I used the same green crepe paper, but I used this petal shape for this larger one. So I just want to note that here in case you're like looking at this and being like, oh, the petal shape is different from this one. So you can of course mix and match your colors when it comes to which crepe paper you use with which style. It's not exact. I like to mix it all up because they all come in different petal shapes and different colors. So just wanted to point that out there in case there's anyone wondering about that. So we're gonna go ahead and start with this, and I'm going to grab the little circle that you see in the templates. This is the only thing that I highly recommend you cut out in a piece of cardstock. So something like a medium weight cardstock, medium 65 to 80 pound cardstock, it's just easier than the crepe paper because the crepe paper is gonna have stretch to it. It's not gonna have a lot of stiffness, so it's very flexible. But when you do the cardstock and you're gluing your petals on, it just works a lot better. So I do recommend having cardstock just for the circle piece here. So we're gonna be using the smaller circle, of course, because we're making the smaller styles of the succulents. And I'm gonna go ahead and just start by gluing them around. So obviously I've already shaped these, but sometimes as I'm gluing things in, I'll mess with them a little bit more. The bottom part here, I like to sort of fold it just a little bit because it makes the petal stand up a bit more when you go to glue it down. And the depth of this little tab that you folded down here is how far you want to come in on the circle. So use that as your guide. So here's a close-up for you. So you can see how I came in right there where the petal starts to get wider. That's where I start and how far I come in on the circle. And then we're just going to continue around. When you go to overlap, you want to overlap about a quarter of the petal. And you can vary that. So this one here, I didn't overlap quite as much. You can see there's a lot more space between that. So this one I'm doing a little bit more drastic than overlap. I recommend if you're making a lot of these for like a display or something like that, that you vary what you're doing. And it's gonna create that more authentic look to your succulents when they're all together. But in general, you want a very slight overlap to your petals. And again, I'm just going around that circle's edge with that tab there, using that as my reference for how far I bring the petal in with the glue. And what's interesting about these petal shapes is if you stretch a little wider and you don't mess with the point very much, you can almost change the entire look of the flower from more pointed to more rounded. So I have this habit. I like to pinch the tips of them, which makes them look more pointed. And this one here, I kept it more round. This one's going to have a few more petals than this one because I'm overlapping a little bit closer together. So you'll be able to see a contrast between the two when I get done with this flower. And that way you can decide how you want yours to look based on the two options I'll show you. So I'm just going to continue to go around until I have closed the circle. All right, there we go. So our first layer has been added on here. This was the last petal I put in, and notice that when I put it in, I tucked it so that the starting petal here, the last petal is going underneath the starting petal. So I just tucked it in like that when I went and glued, and that creates a more seamless look. So I want to point that out for you if you're wanting to achieve the same effect. Now we're going to carry on with the next layer. When we add our next layer, you're going to do the same thing, kind of bend that bottom bit right there where you're going to put your glue. And we're going to be placing them to aim them in between the petals that we just put down. Just like that. Now, as far as how far you bring this petal in, where the first petal stops is where I am gluing directly on top of to place the petal in as far as the distance that we're coming into the circle. And then I'm just aiming for that petal to fall roughly between the two petals below it. And that's going to achieve that look that you see here. So doing the exact same thing all the way around. At this point, you can see it's a very repetitive process, and it's a lot of just building petal by petal. When you get to these more inner layers, so like the second layer and the third layer, you will naturally need to overlap just a little bit more. So you will see an increase in the amount of overlap naturally as you work towards the center. And what's important here as well is that you're looking at how it's looking to your eye as it's coming together. So, following suggestions about how far to bring your petal in and where to place it is important, but at the same time, what you're seeing take place and take shape here is ultimately the result you're going to be looking at. So that's the most important thing. Okay, so I'm about to add my last petal to the second row, and I mentioned in the first row how I kind of tucked one petal underneath. You can kind of accomplish that here, but it can also not look right to my eye. So in this case, I'm actually not going to do that. I'm going to put it directly over both petals because it's not sitting in a way that looks pleasing to my eye with the petal layout. And it's going to be extremely hard to tell what's going on there once the other petals are added in. So again, use your judgment, evaluate what you're seeing happening here. We're going to carry on with the next row. All these petals are the same size. There is no size variations to them. It's kind of somewhat typical of a lot of succulents, but ultimately it's the centers where there could be smaller petals. But in my case of my designs here, what I like to do is I like to sort of fold the centers inwards to create more closure, which is what I'll be demonstrating as we get towards the end. So for this next row here, we're on our third row layer going around, and I'm just going to repeat the exact same process. There'll be a little more overlap. It'll get a little more tight in there. You'll be using less petals per layer because of the space is shrinking in there. Okay, I'm adding my last petal in here for my third row. I'm not tucking it or anything, I'm just gluing it directly in. And here's what we have so far for our first succulent. All right, so at this point, I'm going to add my fourth row around, and you can see because I went tighter on my petals here as far as like my overlap, and I did less overlap on this one, how much different these two already look from each other. Both equally beautiful, both could definitely represent a succulent, but we obviously used more petals and more crepe paper for this one and less petals and less crepe paper for this one. So you can already see the variation in what we can create just by altering our overlap and how many petals we put into one flower. So I'm going to continue on with a fourth row, and then we'll close the center up, and I'll show you that. So I'm just going to go in and do exactly the same thing for the next row here. It's going to get a little more snug in there. So be patient. You may also kind of want to encourage a bit of a curl at this point. As you're pressing it in, kind of encourage it to curl forward a bit more by using your finger. All right, I've added my last petal in there. So just for those of you who want to know exactly how many petals I got going on here, at this point I have 4 rows, 4 layers, however you would like to phrase it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the first. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the second. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in the third, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in the 4th. For those of you who are like, I really want to know and I want to follow along exactly, that's what you're seeing happening here. Now I've got, let's see, 5 petals left here. And these 5 petals that are remaining, one thing that I like to note is because we're going to be kind of drastically curling them more so than these other petals here, it can be nice to actually distress both sides of those if you would like during the distressing process, or just reverse the cupping. So if you have distressing on only one side, and since we're going to be curling it in more, instead of putting the distressing so that it's on the inside part, it's facing outside. I haven't actually shaped these petals yet, but I did decide to go ahead and to distress on both sides, since you're kind of going to get a little bit of a view on both sides, but you're definitely going to get the most view on the exterior of the petal rather than the interior like we have at this point. So I'm going to stretch these. These you really want to kind of encourage to bend at the top with your finger. And I'm going to stick that in there, and it's going to get a little crunchy, so just be aware of that. Your fingers are going to feel like they're huge for a few minutes in the flower. And it's really paying attention to what's looking good to your eye at this point, that slight overlap. And I'm going to squeeze those other 3 in there. And it'll look nice and closed when we're done with it. And this is going to be very similar. I'm going to show you these other 2 builds here, but you're going to notice as we get into them, it's almost identical. It's just the different shape of the petal and the result that you're getting because of the different shape of the petal. Okay, so I'm adding my last petal in here. And I had 5 for this 5th and final center layer happening here. Now it might kind of open up a little bit like this. And what I'll do is I'll come in with my finger and I'll just start pressing some of these petals forward a bit more. And some openness is fine. Succulents do that as well. They're not all perfectly closed in the center. There's some openness to them. And if you're like, I really, really want this to stay super closed, you can always tack a bit of glue and then just press like a couple of the petals overlapping together to keep that closure to the center. So I like to gather some of these petals and kind of tuck and press them in a little bit so it closes that up. And succulent centers in nature, they're very imperfect. They're not always straight. They're very imperfect. So you don't have to worry about yours being perfect. All right, so here is our purple design in my case. And you can see we did more petals here, so it created a slightly different look. Choose whichever one you like. I encourage you to even mix and match. I think that's really fun when you're doing a bunch of them together. So I'm gonna go ahead and I got my little circle cut out here. Got all my petals prepped and ready to go. And they're kind of nice and curled. Same thing, same principle applies. I kind of bend it at the tip there, add my glue, place it about that far in, right where the petal starts to widen. That's my stopping point for how far I place it in on the circle. And we're going to continue around. At this point, you can see that there is quite a bit of repetitiveness and pattern to this, and a lot of it's just the working process. As far as the overlap here, I keep it pretty minimal, very minimal, to where the middle part of the petal is just barely overlapping and touching. There's quite a bit of space hanging out at the top there. All right, so I'm adding in my last petal here. And here's what we have so far. And we're going to continue around exactly the same as before. All right, so I just added in my last petal there. I didn't really tuck that one. I didn't really find it necessary in this case. But that's what we have so far. We're going to continue on with the third layer now. Once you get down to this third layer part, you really want to exaggerate that curling effect a bit more because you want it to kind of start to close in on itself. So I'll almost kind of from the bottom encourage it to curl down more and then add that crease for where we put our glue at that tip there. Okay, I'm adding in my last petal for that third layer around there. You can see I've really exaggerated that curl a bit more. And this is what we're working with at this point. So for the center part to finish this off, I'm gonna guess I'm getting anywhere from 4 to 6 in there, depending on how much I overlap. And you really wanna exaggerate the curl at this point because you want it to kind of curl in and close on itself a bit. So after I cup, I'll kind of just curl it forward a bit, especially focusing on that tip. So it looks more like this. And then fold at the bottom there where we put our glue, and then come in here and get that placed around. All right, there we go. So I've got all my petals added in. Okay, so we're down to our last succulent. Now, I'm not going to give too much detail on this because it's so identical to what I've already taught, but I am just going to show you a quick visual of what I'm doing here, and then I'll count like the petal counts like we did before so you can get an idea from how mine looks exactly. You always want to start with those suggested petal minimums that I give you at the beginning of the video, and then there can be some leftovers, or sometimes you have to cut a few more. So same thing, folding at the bottom, adding that glue, bringing it in right where that petal starts to whiten. I will say that if you go heavier on the petals like I did on a couple of my examples here compared to my originals, it is going to look a little bit more lifelike, realistic. The more details you add to something, the more lifelike it becomes. And I think that's very true. I probably would amend the statement to the more simplistic details you add to things, because I think when we hear details, we can also think complexity and kind of almost overdoing it a bit. So I say keep it simple and classic, but add the details, those simple details, where they matter most. And sometimes a few extra petals is where that detail pops the most. And we're going to continue on. Again, placing between the existing petals below it, aiming to alternate those petal points like that. All right, so our second layer is done, and I ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in that layer. And we're going to continue again. Third layer. I'm going to try and get 3 around in there, and then like 2 final in the center. Sometimes I find it helpful to have something that you can sort of stick down in it that's thinner than your finger to press the petal in. Just use my scissors there. You could use like a pencil too, or a wood dowel. So I'm going to try and add 2 more petals in there. If I can get 3, I'll do it, but I think 2 is probably going to be pretty snug, but we'll see what happens when I get this last one in here. All right, there we go. So I went ahead, I had 3, and then I had 2 final ones in the center there. So there's how that one turned out. You can see this one here, I left my petals a little bit more relaxed so that the flower was a little bit wider. And I do have quite a few petals left over here. So if you're like, you know what, I like the variation, keep it like that. If you're like, oh, you know, I really want it to be bigger, I have some extra petals here, then you could just come in here like this and do another round of petals to make this bigger. I'm not going to do that, but that's an option for you. Now, if we want to talk about stemming these, I find that working with succulents, one of the ways I like to style them is I like to put them on wreaths. I like to get little just like jars with some like rocks in them, and I'll literally just set the design with like the little rocks and the jar or the vase around it, and I don't actually even use a stem. However, so let's say you want to stem. I'm going to stem this purple one here. If you're planning to stem, you're going to want to cut an additional piece of the circle cardstock that I mentioned at the beginning, the part that we glued the base to, okay? So you're going to want to cut an additional piece of that. And you're going to want to grab your detail scissors, and you're going to want to poke a little hole right in the center. The reason I don't actually put a hole in this is because when you poke a hole naturally, your wire is going to be a lot more flush to the base, and it's not going to have like this open space where glue can leak through the bottom. So I say just, grab a pair of scissors and you're going to poke a hole through it. I have just a surface here that I really don't want to damage, so you may want like a self-healing mat underneath. I have this super handy tool here. It's called the Paper Bloom Shaping Mat and Tool Set, and it works for cardstock flowers where you want to cup the petals for cardstock paper. And it's a surface that is puncture resistant, so I like to use it in this case, but I do recommend having something underneath that won't get damaged when you're doing this part. And I'm just loosely aiming for the center here. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm just going to poke this teeny tiny hole. And then we're going to take our wire. So this is a floral wire. It's 18 gauge floral wire. The 18 gauge is a nice thickness and it will hold nice and stiff. At the tip of your wire here, you want to bend, I'd say about 3/4 of an inch down, definitely no more than an inch. You want to bend it at a 90-degree angle. So just like that, 90-degree angle. And then you're going to form a small circle with it. It's not going to be a perfect circle. It's going to be more like a sloppy circle or a sloppy oval. But I'm using my needle nose pliers here to form a circle at the top there. And this is going to act as a base for us to add hot glue to. So we want to grab that little extra circle that has the little punctured hole in there, and you'll feel how nice and tight that wire slides right up. And you're going to press that base right against where we created that circle. You're going to want to load it up with some hot glue, specifically over the wire area. And when it's got the hot glue on it, you want to grab your flower and place that on top. And then I like to flip it. And you're going to want to hold it for a good 20 seconds before you attempt to let go, 30 seconds, because we don't want the weight of the wire to sort of have it pull away. And that's how you would stem these succulents if you are going that route. That's how you would add your stem, and we're good to go now. We can put this in a bouquet, in an arrangement. So if you want to put your succulents into like a pot or a bowl, which is what I prefer, go out and find something that's kind of shallow and wide is what I recommend. So I found these at my local home goods store. And I'm just going to show you what I did here to build this up. And then all I do is I actually just set the succulents on top. Now, if you want to stem them like I showed you already, you could stem them and then sort of push them into this so it's a little bit more stable. But since mine's going to be sitting just on a table and no one's really going to be messing with it, I'm not worried about that part. So choose whichever option works for you. So if you have a piece of like floral foam, that can go in here and work really well. I do not actually have a piece that would fit in here very well right now without going to my craft store. So I'm going to improvise, and I wanted to show this because I thought some people might be in the same situation and they might find it helpful. So what I do have on hand is just some polyester fluff, as I call it. And I'm going to pull out some chunks of that and put it in the bottom of the pot here to fill up some of that space. Next, I'm going to use this moss. So you could also use, if you have other silk greeneries or something on hand that might be similar to this, feel free to use that. I'm going to use a little bit of moss here to cover up this white. You could even put, if you have like a piece of green fabric or something, over the top. So I'm going to put my moss in here. All right, so that's pretty good. The moss is a little messy, so fair warning on that. And then you can add something like some rocks or something on top of it too if you want. You could even leave it here. I'm going to put these little rock vase fillers on them. You can get them in small sizes and different colors. You can also get them in larger, like chunkier rocks and such. Actually, I'm going to try the white just to be different. Okay, so then at this point, you can just go ahead and place your succulents. If you have a stem in them, you can just gently shove it through in between the rocks. Otherwise, you're welcome to just place them directly on top, kind of like to put them in a set of 3, maybe in this one would look good. Like that. It looks like a cute little succulent garden. We could also fill up the bigger one if we wanted to. Alright, so I like to keep it very simple, just like that. So to pile them on, and it looks like a cute little succulent garden now. This is so easy to do, and it just takes a few supplies in the pot. Alright, my friend, so go ahead and make your succulents, play around with how you want to arrange them. I would love to see how yours turned out. Make sure you tag us on social media or post in the community Facebook group or just send us an email. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Download the succulent templates and explore the full Cali Botanical collection when you join A-Star Crafters. And if you're not a member yet, come over and join us. You can unlock an entire garden full of possibilities with new makes and designs with me every single month.